The distress signal came screaming through subspace at 3 in the morning, ship time. Captain Jake Morrison was nursing his second cup of coffee in the quiet of the night watch when the comm officer, a kid named Tim Blake, who still looked like he should be in high school, practically jumped out of his chair. "Captain, we've got a mayday. Big one." Jake had been commanding the Iron Wolf for 8 years now, and he'd learned to read his crew's voices. Tim's voice carried that particular edge that meant this wasn't just another broken-down freighter or lost tourist vessel. This was something serious. He set down his mug, the ceramic clinking softly against the metal table in the ship's small ready room. The coffee was terrible, recycled water and synthetic beans that tasted like burned plastic, but it kept him awake during the long shifts between stars. "Put it through, Tim." The bridge of the Iron Wolf hummed with quiet activity even at this late hour. The ship never really slept. Life support systems whispered in the walls. The artificial gravity generator thrummed beneath the deck plates, and the navigation computer clicked and beeped as it calculated their next jump coordinates. It was a comfortable sound, like a mechanical heartbeat that reminded everyone aboard they were alive in the vast emptiness of space. Jake walked over to the communications console, his boots making soft thuds on the metal deck. Tim was hunched over his station, his young face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. The kid was good at his job, had been top of his class at the academy, but he still had that wide-eyed look that came from being fresh out of training. "Here it comes, sir," Tim said, his fingers dancing over the controls. The automated message began cycling in Galactic Standard, and Jake felt his stomach drop as the translator rendered it into English. "Colony ship Peaceful Tide requesting immediate assistance. Unknown predators have breached our hull. 8,000 Veltar civilians aboard. Life support critical. We cannot fight these things." The message repeated 3 times, each repetition carrying the same desperate tone. Whoever had programmed it had done so in a hurry. Jake could tell. The syntax was slightly off, like someone had been typing with shaking hands. 8,000, Jake muttered under his breath. That was a lot of lives hanging in the balance. Dr. Amy Wells looked up from her workstation across the bridge. She was a ship's xenobiologist, a woman in her 40s who knew more about alien species than most people knew about their own neighbors. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her lab coat was stained with whatever she'd been working on in the research bay. "Did you say Veltar?" she asked, already reaching for her tablet. "Yeah. You know them?" Amy's fingers flew across her tablet screen, pulling up files from the Galactic Species Database. "Aquatic herbivores from the Andromeda Spiral," she said, scrolling through the data. "Think giant space dolphins, but more fragile. They're completely pacifist. Haven't fought a war in over 2,000 years. Their entire culture is built around harmony and peaceful coexistence." Jake studied the photos on her screen. The Veltar were beautiful creatures, with smooth blue-gray skin and large, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom. They looked gentle, almost ethereal, like something from a fairy tale. If something's got them scared enough to call for help. Amy continued, her voice trailing off as she read more of the file. Jake nodded grimly. He'd dealt with enough alien species to know that the peaceful ones didn't panic easily. If the Veltar were sending out distress calls, something was seriously wrong. He turned to the tactical display, watching as Tim fed the coordinates into system. The colony ship was drifting near the Kepler debris field, a massive graveyard of dead ships and shattered asteroids that stretched for millions of kilometers. It was the kind of place pirates like to hide, where long-range sensors got confused by all the floating junk. "Not exactly a neighborhood you want to break down in," Jake muttered. "How long has this been broadcasting?" he asked him. The young comm officer checked his readings. 3 days, sir. The signal's been bouncing around subspace relays across half the sector. 3 days. Jake felt his jaw tighten. Any other ships responded? Negative, sir. No other ships have acknowledged the signal. That told Jake everything he needed to know. The galaxy was full of species willing to help each other out. Trade federations, mutual defense pacts, humanitarian organizations that responded to disasters. When nobody in the galaxy wanted to touch a rescue mission, it usually meant whatever was out there was nasty enough to make even the toughest military forces think twice. The Krillian Defense Force, for instance, were known for taking on impossible odds. If they weren't responding to a distress call from peaceful civilians, there had to be a very good reason. Jake looked around his bridge at his crew. Tim was still monitoring communications, his young face serious with concentration. Amy was deep in her research, probably trying to figure out what kind of threat could terrify a species that had lived in peace for millennia. At the weapons station, Lieutenant Beth Parker was running diagnostics on their defensive systems, her experienced hands moving over controls with practiced ease. These were good people, humans who'd signed up to explore the stars, to make contact with alien civilizations, to push the boundaries of what was possible. They hadn't signed up to be heroes, but Jake had a feeling they were about to become exactly that. Set course for the Kepler debris field, he ordered. Maximum acceleration. Sir, Tim said hesitantly, shouldn't we contact Fleet Command first? Request backup. Jake was already moving toward his captain's chair. 8,000 lives, Tim. How long do you think they have? The young man's face went pale as he realized what the captain was saying. Every minute they spent waiting for orders or backup was another minute those civilians were dying. Aye, sir. Course laid in. As the Iron Wolf turned toward the distant distress signal, Jake settled into his chair and grabbed his coffee mug again. The liquid was cold now, but he drank it anyway. Something told him it was going to be a very long day. The Iron Wolf dropped out of FTL with a familiar shudder that every spacer knew by heart. The hyperspace engines wound down with a deep thrumming sound that vibrated through the ship's hull, and suddenly they were back in normal space, surrounded by stars instead of the swirling chaos of faster-than-light travel. For a moment, everything on the bridge was normal. Tim was checking their position against the navigation charts. Dr. Wells was organizing her research files, and Lieutenant Beth Parker was running her usual post-jump diagnostics on the ship systems. It was routine, the kind of thing they'd done 1,000 times before. Then the main viewer flickered to life, and immediately, everyone on the bridge went quiet. Jesus, whispered Lieutenant Beth Parker from the tactical station, her voice barely audible in the sudden silence. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. He'd seen a lot of things in his years commanding the Iron Wolf. Pirate attacks, asteroid collisions, ships torn apart by gravitational anomalies, but nothing quite like this. The Veltar colony ship was massive, easily 3 kilometers long and half a kilometer wide. It was a beautiful vessel, or had been once. The Veltar built their ships like works of art, with flowing lines and graceful curves that reminded Jake of sea creatures gliding through ocean currents. The hull was a soft pearl color that caught starlight and reflected it in gentle waves across its surface. But now it looked like something had been feeding on it. Crawling across the ship's hull were thousands of metallic creatures about the size of motorcycles. From this distance, they looked like ants swarming over a dropped piece of candy. But Jake knew they were much deadlier. They moved with purpose, their sharp limbs tearing chunks of both metal and whatever organic matter they could find. Where they passed, the beautiful pearl hull was left scarred and pitted, with gaping holes that vented atmosphere and debris into space. "My God," Tim whispered, his young face pale as he stared at the screen. "There are so many of them." Dr. Wells had gone very still at her station, her tablet forgotten in her hands as she studied the creatures swarming over the dying ship. "Void Ravagers," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of fascination and horror. "I've read about these things in the xenobiology journals, but I've never seen them in person." "What are we dealing with here, Doc?" Jake asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Amy pulled up files on her tablet, her fingers shaking slightly as she scrolled through the data. "They're basically space piranha that can survive in vacuum. Silicon-based life forms with metallic exoskeletons. They can eat almost anything, metal, organic matter, even certain types of energy. And the worst part," she paused, looking up from her tablet with grim eyes. "Once they start feeding, they multiply exponentially. Every few hours, their population doubles." Jake watched through the viewport as the creatures swarmed over the colony ship like a living tide. Here and there, he could see flashes of light where the Veltar were still trying to fight back with their defensive systems, but it was clearly a losing battle. The gentle, peaceful aliens weren't equipped to deal with something like this. How do other species handle them? Beth asked from her tactical station, though she was already running weapons diagnostics with the efficiency of a career military officer. They don't, Dr. Wells replied grimly. Most species in the galaxy treat Ravager infestations like natural disasters. When you see them coming, you run, and you don't look back. There are entire star systems that have been abandoned because of these things. The bridge fell silent again as everyone absorbed that information. Jake could see the doubt creeping into his crew's faces. They were good people, brave people, but they weren't stupid. If entire civilizations fled from these creatures, what chance did one human ship have? "Sir," Tim called out, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm getting a transmission from the colony ship." "Put it through," Jake ordered. The alien face that appeared on screen made Jake's heart ache. The Veltar was pale blue with large, dark eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the universe. Her skin had a translucent quality, like looking at someone underwater, and bioluminescent patches along her temples flickered with what Jake recognized as distress signals. "Human vessel," the Veltar said to the Universal Translator, her voice carrying a musical quality even through the electronic rendering. "We thank you for responding to our call, but you must leave this place immediately. These creatures cannot be defeated. They are beyond fighting, beyond reasoning. We have made our peace with what is to come." The alien's resignation was heartbreaking. Jake could see other Veltar in the background of the transmission, families huddled together in what looked like an emergency shelter. Children, if that's what young Veltar were called, pressed close to their parents, their own bioluminescent patches flickering with fear. "How many of you are left?" Jake asked gently. "Perhaps 6,000 now," the alien replied. Her translator struggled with what sounded like a sob. "The creatures broke through our outer hull 2 days ago. They have been feeding ever since. Our life support systems are failing. We estimate perhaps 3 hours before total atmospheric loss." Jake felt anger building in his chest, a hot, burning sensation that he recognized from his younger days. It was the same feeling he'd gotten as a kid when bullies picked on smaller children, the same rage that had driven him to join the Space Force in the first place. These were innocent people, gentle, peaceful beings who had never hurt anyone, and they were being slaughtered by mindless predators. He looked around his bridge at his crew. Beth was running weapons diagnostics, her jaw set with determination. At the Marine Bay entrance, he could see Sergeant Sam Rodriguez already suiting up his squad, checking weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency. Dr. Wells was pulling up everything she could find about Ravager biology, her scientific mind already working on solutions. These were humans, Earthborn, raised on a world where everything from the weather to the wildlife was actively trying to kill them. They'd grown up learning that when something threatened the innocent, you didn't run away. You fought back. Jake looked back at the alien on screen, at those large, sad eyes that had already given up hope and made the easiest decision of his life. "Negative, peaceful tide," he said firmly. "You hang tight down there. The cavalry's coming." The Veltar's bioluminescent patches flickered in what might have been confusion. "Cavalry? We do not understand this term." Jake smiled grimly as he watched his crew spring into action around him. "You will—" 24 humans in powered armor burned across space toward the infested colony ship, their jetpacks leaving bright trails against the starfield. From the bridge of the Iron Wolf, Jake watched his Marines cross the gap between ships with the kind of controlled aggression that made him proud to be human. Sergeant Sam Rodriguez had been with Jake for 3 years now, ever since the Proxima Station incident. The man was built like a tank and had grown up in the Australian outback, where learning to fight dangerous creatures wasn't optional. It was survival. His squad was handpicked from volunteers, men and women who'd signed up for this kind of work, because sitting behind a desk sounded like torture. "Remember, people," Sam's voice crackled over the comm channel as they approached the colony ship. "These things are fast and they're hungry, but they're not smart. Stick to your training, watch your six, and don't get fancy." The Ravagers spotted the approaching humans immediately. They swarmed toward the Marines like they'd just rung the dinner bell, their metallic bodies glinting in the light of the nearby star. There were hundreds of them crawling across the colony ship's hull, and now dozens more were launching themselves into space toward what they probably thought was an easy meal. Big mistake. Sam hit the hull first, his magnetic boots clamping down with a solid thunk that vibrated through his armor. 3 Ravagers dug at him from different angles, their razor-sharp claws extended and their mouths opening to reveal rows of teeth that could chew through titanium plating. His plasma rifle turned them into glowing vapor before they got within 10 meters. Around him, his Marines spread out across the hull with the kind of casual efficiency that comes from growing up on a world where everything from the weather to the wildlife is actively trying to kill you. Private Lisa Chun, no relation to any of the band names, just a coincidence, took position near a massive hull breach and started picking off Ravagers with her sniper rifle like she was hunting deer back home in Montana. "This is actually kind of fun," she commented over the comm, her voice steady as she lined up another shot. Like a shooting gallery, except the targets shoot back. Corporal Danny Wright, a farm boy from Iowa, was using his combat engineering training to seal smaller hull breaches while simultaneously fighting off attacking Ravagers. Rodriguez the Iron Wolf. Sam's voice crackled over the comm as he watched Danny work. "Hull breach on Deck 7. Looks like these things have been having a feast down here. The damage was extensive. The Ravagers have been systematically eating their way through the ship's outer hull, leaving jagged holes that vented atmosphere and debris into space." But what impressed Sam was how quickly his people adapted to the situation. This wasn't like fighting human enemies who used tactics and strategy. This was pest control on a massive scale. Inside the colony ship, the Veltar huddled in emergency shelters, watching their security monitors in amazement as the humans moved through the corridors like they owned the place. The aliens had expected the newcomers to be overwhelmed, just like every other species that had encountered Ravagers. Instead, they were watching something that defied everything they understood about how the universe worked. The Ravagers that had been unstoppable forces of nature, creatures that ate entire ships and left nothing but empty hulks drifting in space, were getting systematically hunted down by beings that seemed to actually enjoy the challenge. Private Nick Harper was welding an emergency bulkhead, while Ravagers scratched at it from the other side, their claws leaving deep gouges in the metal. The sound was like fingernails on a chalkboard, magnified 100 times, but Nick just kept working with steady hands. "You know," he said conversationally to his squad mate, Private Tony Garcia, "this reminds me of clearing rats out of my uncle's barn back home. Just bigger rats. And in space." Tony laughed as he gunned down 3 Ravagers that had tried to flank them through a ventilation shaft. "My mom always said I should have stayed in college. Should have listened to her." "Yeah, right," Nick replied, finishing the weld and testing the seal. "You'd be bored out of your mind sitting in some office somewhere. This is way more interesting." Meanwhile, Dr. Wells was coordinating the entire operation from the Iron Wolf, turning the colony ship's own systems into weapons. She'd pulled up the ship's technical specifications and was finding creative ways to use Veltar technology against the invaders. "Garcia, cut power to Section 12 and vent the atmosphere," she instructed over the comm. "Let vacuum do the work for you. These things can survive in space, but they don't like sudden decompression." "Copy that, Doc," Tony replied, already moving toward the nearest control panel. "Harper, I need you to overload the electrical grid in Deck 9, she continued. "According to my scans, these things are highly conductive. A good electrical surge should fry their nervous systems." The Veltar watching on their monitors couldn't believe what they were seeing. The humans weren't just fighting the Ravagers. They were using the ship itself as a weapon, turning environmental systems and power grids into tools of war. It was like watching someone perform surgery with a sledgehammer, except somehow it was working. One young Veltar, barely more than a child, pressed her face against the transparent aluminum window of their shelter. "How are they doing this?" she asked her elder, her bioluminescent patches flickering with wonder instead of fear for the first time in days. The elder watched as a human marine used a maintenance tunnel to outflank a group of Ravagers, popping up behind them like some kind of deadly jack-in-the-box. "I do not know, little one. Their species database says they come from a world called Earth. Perhaps their planet has prepared them for this in ways we cannot understand." Outside, the Marines continued their work with the methodical efficiency of professional exterminators. They'd turned what should have been a desperate last stand into something that looked almost routine. The Ravagers, for all their ferocity and numbers, had never encountered prey that fought back as effectively. For the first time in 3 days, the Veltar began to hope they might actually survive. 2 hours later, the last Ravager corpse was drifting away from the peaceful tide, spinning slowly in the vacuum of space like a piece of metallic debris. The silence that followed the battle felt almost unnatural after days of constant scratching, tearing, and the horrible sound of the creatures feeding on the ship's hull. But the humans weren't done yet. While Sergeant Rodriguez and his Marines had been playing exterminator, Captain Jake had already called in his damage control teams. The Iron Wolf carried a full complement of engineers, technicians, and repair specialists, people who'd learned their trade fixing things that broke in the most inconvenient places imaginable. Chief Engineer Pete Kowalski had been in the Space Force for 15 years, and he'd seen every kind of ship damage you could imagine. Meteor strikes, plasma cannon hits, engine explosions, gravity well collapses. If it could break a spaceship, Pete had probably fixed it at least once. "All right, people," he announced over the comm as his team suited up. "We've got massive hull breaches, compromised life support, and probably structural damage throughout. Standard disaster protocol. Johnson, take your team to the forward sections. Martinez, you got engineering. I'll handle the main hull repairs." Industrial foam began sealing hull breaches within minutes of the last Ravager being eliminated. The foam was a human invention, something they developed for emergency repairs in deep space where you couldn't exactly call for a tow truck. It expanded to fill gaps, hardened in vacuum, and provided both structural integrity and atmospheric sealing. Portable atmosphere generators, each one the size of a refrigerator, but packed with enough power to supply breathable air for 1,000 people, were rolled into damaged sections of the ship. Human engineers crawled to the ship's infrastructure like they'd built it themselves, following maintenance tunnels and service corridors that the Veltar hadn't even remembered existed. The efficiency was remarkable to watch. These weren't heroes performing impossible feats. They were just people doing their jobs, the same way they would have fixed a broken water pipe or repaired a damaged road back home on Earth. Tommy Martinez, a young engineer from New Mexico, was rewiring a power distribution center while chatting with his partner about weekend plans. "My brother's getting married next month," he was saying as he spliced optical cables with practiced ease. "Wants me to be best man, but I told him I might be stuck out here for a while." His partner, Carol Stevens, laughed as she replaced a burned-out power coupling. "Tell him to live stream the ceremony. Half the weddings I've been to lately have been over video calls anyway." It was this casual attitude that amazed the Veltar more than anything else. The humans treated repairing a ship that had been nearly destroyed by space monsters like it was routine maintenance, something they did every day. The Veltar slowly emerged from their shelters to find their ship not just cleared of threats, but actually in better shape than it had been in months. Systems that had been running at reduced capacity for years were suddenly operating at peak efficiency. Hull sections that had shown metal fatigue were reinforced with human-designed support beams. Even their navigation computer was running faster thanks to some optimization work by a human technician who'd been bored during the repair work. Captain Jake Morrison stood in their main corridor, his armor scorched but his expression calm, discussing repair schedules with the colony ship's engineering staff. The Veltar engineers were pale blue beings with delicate features and soft voices, but they listened intently as Jake explained the work his people had done. "We've replaced your primary life support system with one of our backup units," Jake was saying, pointing to a schematic on a portable display. "It's rated for 10,000 people, so you'll have plenty of capacity. The hull patches should last you at least 50 years, probably longer if you maintain them properly." The Veltar medical officer, who'd first answered their hail, approached cautiously. Her bioluminescent patches were flickering in what Dr. Wells, monitoring from the Iron Wolf, recognized as complete bewilderment. The poor alien looked like someone had just told her that gravity was optional. "We do not understand," she said, her translator rendering her musical voice into something that sounded almost human, but not quite. "The Ravagers were a death sentence. Our military databases classify them as an extinction-level threat. Entire star systems have been abandoned because of these creatures. How did you simply eliminate them?" Jake removed his helmet and ran a hand through his hair. It was damp with sweat, and there was a thin line of grease across his forehead where the helmet seal had been. He looked tired, but not particularly impressed with what they'd just accomplished. To him, this had been just another day at the office. "Ma'am, where we come from, something's always trying to eat us," he said with a slight shrug. "Makes you good at eating back." The alien's translator struggled with the concept, making small electronic noises as it tried to process the idiom. "Eating back? This does not translate properly. Do you mean you consume the Ravagers?" Dr. Wells had joined them in the corridor, her tablet in hand and a patient expression on her face. She'd spent years studying alien cultures, and she learned that sometimes the most basic human concepts were the hardest to explain. "Fighting," she clarified. "What he means is, humans are very good at fighting things that want to kill us. It's something we've had to learn. The Veltar's patches dim with what might have been sadness. Your world must be a terrible place." Jake looked around at his crew, busy making final repairs and preparing to escort the colony ship to safety, and smiled. "Nah, it's beautiful. Just keeps you honest." As the Iron Wolf prepared to escort the colony ship to its destination, the Veltar began frantically updating their cultural databases. What started as a simple rescue mission was turning into something much bigger, a complete revision of how the galaxy viewed humanity. The entry on humans had previously been a brief note buried deep in the xenocultural archives. Aggressive omnivores from Sol System recently achieved faster-than-light travel, approached with standard diplomatic caution. Now, dozens of Veltar scholars were working around the clock to completely rewrite that entry. Dr. Lyra Vess, the colony ship's chief cultural analyst, floated in her water-filled office surrounded by holographic displays showing human combat footage, repair techniques, and tactical analysis. Her bioluminescent patches flickered rapidly as she processed what she'd witnessed. "Delete the previous entry entirely," she instructed her computer. "Begin new file. Humans, Terra/Sol System. Classification, Apex Rescue Species. Note, when facing extinction-level threats, consider immediate contact with nearest human vessel." Her assistant, a younger Veltar named Kef, swam closer to review the data. "Should we include the combat analysis?" "Everything," Dr. Vess replied. "Their fighting techniques, their repair methods, even their casual attitude toward mortal danger. Other species need to understand what these beings are capable of." Meanwhile, Captain Jake Morrison found himself in the colony ship's observation deck, a beautiful curved space with transparent walls that offered a stunning view of the stars. The Veltar captain, an elderly being named Tidal Singer of Deep Currents, had invited him for what seemed to be an important cultural ritual. They were sharing a drink, some kind of synthesized seaweed extract that tasted like liquid salt water mixed with grass clippings. It was absolutely awful, but Jake could tell it was important to their culture, so he kept sipping it with a straight face. "Your species confuses us greatly," Tidal Singer admitted, her voice carrying harmonics that the universal translator couldn't quite capture. "Every other race in the galaxy flees from Ravager swarms. The Krillians, the Zephyrians, even the militaristic Harn Empire, all consider them unstoppable forces of nature. You treated them like a minor inconvenience." Jake shrugged, watching his engineering teams put the finishing touches on the hull repairs visible through the observation deck's windows. "Different perspectives, I guess. You see an unstoppable swarm of space monsters. We see Saturday morning pest control." He could see Tidal Singer struggling with the concept. Her culture had lived in peace for thousands of years, viewing conflict as an aberration, something that happened to other species in distant parts of the galaxy. "Your world must be terrible," she said, her patches dimming with what Jake had learned with sympathy. Jake thought about Earth. The morning sun over the Rocky Mountains, the way the ocean looked from orbit, the sound of rain on his childhood home's roof. "Nah," he said, taking another sip of the awful seaweed drink. "Earth's beautiful. Just keeps you honest, you know? Everything there's evolved to survive, and if you can't keep up, well..." He gestured toward the now clean hull where Ravagers had been feeding just hours before. Natural selection. Back on the Iron Wolf, Dr. Wells was in her lab, compiling reports that would change how the galaxy understood humanity. She recorded everything: the Marines' combat techniques, the engineers' repair methods, even to casual conversations that showed how humans viewed challenges that terrified other species. Personal log, Dr. Amy Wells. She spoke into a recorder while reviewing footage of Sergeant Rodriguez explaining to a young Marine how to use a plasma cutter to remove Ravagers from tight spaces. What we accomplished today wasn't heroism in the traditional sense. It was just humans being humans. We saw a problem, figured out a solution, and got to work. She paused the footage on an image of Private Harper welding a hull breach, while 3 other Marines provided cover fire against approaching Ravagers. The Veltar keep calling us heroes, but I don't think that's accurate. Heroes do extraordinary things. This was just Tuesday for us. Lieutenant Beth Parker was running final systems checks when she overheard a conversation between 2 Veltar engineers discussing human combat tactics. They use their environment as a weapon, one was saying to the other. They turned our own ship systems against the invaders. It's like they see opportunities where we see only obstacles. Beth smiled as she updated the weapons inventory. That was probably the most accurate assessment of humanity she'd heard all day. Later, as both ships jumped to hyperspace, the galaxy's communication networks began buzzing with unprecedented activity. The story of the Peaceful Tide rescue was spreading faster than light across the known worlds. The galactic databases would soon contain a new entry. When something threatens peaceful species and no one else will answer the call, the humans will come running. Not because they're heroes exactly, but because for them, impossible odds are just Tuesday. Within hours of the first reports reaching civilized space, something unprecedented began happening. Distress beacons that had been broadcasting unanswered for years started including new language in their messages. On a mining station under attack by crystal parasites, Mayday, Mayday, requesting human assistance. From a research vessel trapped in a gravity well. SOS to any human ships in range. A passenger liner being stalked by void predators. Urgent, need human rescue team. Humanity had been in space for less than 50 years. They were still considered newcomers by most galactic standards, barely worth noting in the vast catalog of civilized species. But somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, that was already changing. Word was spreading that there was a species from a little blue world called Earth. And when death came calling, they were the ones who answered back. The age of human heroes had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.